The talk of the town yesterday was Jimmy Kimmel late night, and he was telling a story about his son. He has a newborn son who tragically has a heart condition, and he was brought to Children's Hospital. He had to have emergency heart surgery. I guess he was born maybe at Children's Hospital, or at least they transferred him over there. And Jimmy Kimmel tells this story, and then he turns it into a pitch for Obamacare. And I want to talk about this because I have some personal thoughts on the matter.
A little over a week ago on Friday, April 21st, my wife, Molly, gave birth to a boy, a baby boy, and he appeared to be a normal, healthy baby until about 3 hours after he was born, when a very attentive nurse at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, her name is Nanush, was checking him out and heard a murmur in his heart, which is common with newborn babies, but she also noticed he was a bit purple. They did an x-ray, and his lungs were fine, which meant his heart wasn't. So now more doctors and nurses and equipment come in, and it's a terrifying thing. My wife is back in the recovery room. She has no idea what's going on. And I'm standing in the middle of a lot of very worried-looking people, kind of like right now, who are trying to figure out what the problem is. It's Friday night, and so they call a pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Eben Zahn. They did an echocardiogram, which is a sonogram of the heart, and found that Billy was born with a heart disease, something called tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia. It's hard to explain. Basically, the pulmonary valve was completely blocked, and he has a hole in the wall between the left and right sides of his heart. And then they brought my wife in, and they wheeled her in, and Dr. Zahn told her what was going on and what our options were, and we decided to take him to Children's Hospital, where there's a world-renowned cardiac surgeon who is, by all accounts, a genius. His name is Dr. Von Starnes. So we put the baby in an ambulance to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, and on Monday morning, Dr. Starnes opened his chest and fixed one of the two defects in his heart. He went in there with a scalpel and did some kind of magic that I couldn't even begin to explain. He opened the valve, and the operation was a success. It was the longest 3 hours of my life. And I have a list of people I want to thank for making that happen. And I hope I have my list. These are just some of the people who played a part in this. It was an enormous team effort, it really was. And I want to say one other thing. President Trump last month proposed a $6 billion cut in funding to the National Institute of Health. And thank God our congressman made a deal last night to not go along with that. They actually increased funding by $2 billion. Some of the people who would have been affected by those cuts to the National Institute of Health are children, and it would have a major impact on a lot of great places, including Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is so unbelievably sad to me. We were brought up to believe that we live in the greatest country in the world, but until a few years ago, millions and millions of us had no access to health insurance at all. You know, before 2014, if you were born with congenital heart disease like my son was, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance because you had a pre-existing condition. You were born with a pre-existing condition, and if your parents didn't have medical insurance, you might not live long enough to even get denied because of a pre-existing condition. If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that, right?
Okay, so I have some experiences here and I want to talk about them. And I don't really talk about this a lot because I don't like to make my family life an issue on the show and in politics generally. Okay, a couple of years ago, this would have been mid of 2015. My daughter was born in January 2014, mid 2015, like July 2015. My daughter, who is a beautiful little girl, she has the flu and she starts throwing up. And when she's throwing up, she's fainting. And we don't know why. And so we take her into it's very scary. I mean, she's like keeling over, literally fainting dead away while she's throwing up. And it turns out that it was breath holding, but we didn't know that. So we go to the ER, and they do a bunch of tests on her. And one of the tests they do is they run an EKG on her. And they say the EKG looks basically normal, but we just want to have some follow-up. Send us to a cardiologist. And the cardiologist takes a second look and does an ultrasound and then tells us that she has a heart murmur, not just a heart murmur. It's actually such a large hole in her heart. She had an atrial septal defection, ASD, and she had a heart murmur that was so, you couldn't even hear it because the hole in her heart was so large that you couldn't actually, normally the heart murmur comes from, you hear the blood flowing the wrong way through the heart, and you couldn't hear it because the hole was so large in her heart. So in August of last year, August of 2015 rather, she had to have open heart surgery. The surgeon was Dr. Vaughn Starnes, exactly the same surgeon who worked on Jimmy Kimmel's kid. It was at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Could not be more grateful to Children's Hospital LA or Dr. Starnes, who is indeed the master of his craft. There's a reason he's the best in the world, and we were lucky enough to be able to work with him, and he obviously did the work and saved our daughter's life. I mean, she wouldn't have died immediately. It wasn't like an emergency situation quite as much as Jimmy Kimmel's kid, it sounds like, but she would have had failure to thrive as she got older. She would have had to have open heart surgery. If they hadn't detected it, it would have shortened her lifespan to 30 or 40. Now they fixed it. She's good as new. Thank God, everything is fine, and she's great. The reason that I tell this story is because when Jimmy Kimmel starts talking about the National Institutes for Health and federal funding and health insurance and all the rest of us, the reason that I was able to get great coverage for my kid is because I was employed, and also because my wife and I had health insurance long before we had a kid. He's missing a couple of key points here, and I wanted to establish sort of the bona fides here. So when I'm speaking about this, I'm not speaking from the perspective of someone who hasn't experienced nearly identically what Jimmy Kimmel has experienced here. It was absolutely terrifying. I mean, you go and you meet with the doctor, and the doctor tells you your kid, even if the doctor says it's a surgery that's done regularly, it's still frightening as all hell because they're cracking open your kid's chest and cutting her open, and it was hooking her up to tubes. It was really terrifying and horrifying. And thank God she's okay. But the point is that when he immediately connects that to federal funding, when he immediately connects it to Obamacare, I don't like the process, as a general rule, I don't like the process of using personal stories like this to push for legislation or to push for public policy because it doesn't necessarily follow. And what I mean by this is, again, Dr. Starnes, great doctor, Children's Hospital, great hospital. Most of the people, when we were in Children's Hospital during the recovery, we were in the ICU for about a week. When we were in Children's Hospital, most of the people who are in Children's Hospital, I know this because my wife rotated through Children's Hospital because she's a doctor in the LA area. A huge number of the kids in Children's Hospital are not kids who have great insurance. Many of them don't have any insurance. The fact is that in the United States of America, if you have an emergency situation like Jimmy Kimmel had, let's just assume this happened at Cedars-Sinai, again, where my wife gave birth. Let's assume that the exact same situation happened, but there was no insurance, and the doctor spotted that there was this emergency surgery that had to happen in order to prolong the child's life. They don't ask insurance. They immediately send the kid over to Children's Hospital, and Dr. Starnes works on the kid and then somebody else fills the gap. Children's Hospital is very lucky, and the Children's has enormous sums of giving. People give tons of money to Children's Hospital. I'm sure Jimmy Kimmel will too. We've given charity to Children's Hospital. There's a whole wall, an entire wall in Children's Hospital that is just names of celebrities who have given money to Children's Hospital to help support Children's Hospital. People are generous with their giving. People want to save people who are in need. The problem with the argument that we have to cover pre-existing conditions, which is basically what Jimmy Kimmel is saying here, is number one, when it comes to children, it is the job of the parents to have health insurance when the kid is born because the parents' health insurance covers the kid, right? The fact is that my kid was not buying her own health insurance when she was a year and a half old. We had health insurance. It covered her. That doesn't mean that if there's a gap that we as a community shouldn't step in. That's what charity's for. That's why hospitals cover the gap. That's why costs are passed on very often through a backdoor method via the hospital to people who do have insurance. But it does say that it is a mistake as a society to simply say to people that there is no moral responsibility to get health insurance while you're healthy and while you don't have health problems. Because if you don't do that, if you just say whenever you get sick, you can immediately take advantage of the system, people will wait to get sick to take advantage of the system, and you'll end up bankrupting the system. The reason that Children's is so great is because Children's get paid lots of money. They get paid lots and lots and lots of money to do these sorts of things. Dr. Starnes, I'm sure, earns millions of dollars a year, and he deserves every penny that he makes, and he's able to do that because there are people paying voluntarily into health insurance to cover themselves, so when something bad happens, he gets paid. Dr. Starnes is not somebody who should be working for $60,000 a year like a postal worker. If you do that to the health system, you're not going to be able to get the kinds of surgeries that Dr. Starnes provides or the kind of care that Children's Hospital provides. And I think it's deeply important that when we talk about everybody getting the sort of care that Jimmy Kimmel's kid got or that my kid gets, in order for that to happen, you have to make it affordable and quality. The only thing that does that is a free market. And again, that doesn't mean there shouldn't be a safety net provided by a society. I'm not even talking about through government now. I'm talking about through charity and through communities and through charity hospitals. All of that is true. But to use a personal situation that is really difficult and heartbreaking in order to promulgate a public policy that actually doesn't achieve what you're seeking to achieve, children is not worthwhile. Children's Hospital could not be what Children's Hospital is if it existed as a public sector hospital unless you were willing to tax people up the wazoo. And that sort of taxation scheme bankrupts countries and doesn't provide the same care anyway. Look at the National Health Service in Britain or the Nationalized Healthcare Service in Canada. I have nothing but sympathy for Jimmy Kimmel because I've been through, as I say, exactly the same thing. And it's heartbreaking. And that heartbreak should not be used as a political tool in order to push a political agenda. And I'm sure that Jimmy Kimmel believes every word that he's saying. But funding for the National Institutes of Health has nothing to do with what happened here. Again, the American people are insanely generous. The amount of research that goes into the sorts of techniques that Dr. Starnes used is tremendous. And it's not from the public sector in the most part. It's actually from the private sector.